Hello and a very warm welcome to you. I hope you're all keeping yourself nice and safe and practicing some social distancing. I would just want to make a very quick video because I've seen a lot of nonsense spoken about the mortality rate or the death rate for this current lurgy that is occupying the news and occupying the world at the moment. So the death rate, the mortality rate for any infection is determined by taking the total number of cases and the total number of deaths arising from those cases, and simply dividing the total deaths by the total cases and multiplying by 100 to give a percentage. Now the figures on the screen at the moment are a latest download from this morning from a website that publishes worldwide figures. So we have many countries presented here. If I can get this to scroll for you, there we go. All countries that have even single figure cases, and I have calculated on the right hand side the current mortality rates using total cases and total deaths presented in this spreadsheet. Now, this is not an accurate measure of the mortality rate for this virus. The reason it's not an accurate measure is because we don't know how many of these current cases will end up resulting in death, nor do we actually know how many people are infected. The total number of cases is simply the number of people that have tested positive for the virus, or probably in some cases even just people who have presented the right symptoms at hospital and have been diagnosed as having the virus even without being tested. Clearly in places like the USA, Italy, Spain, Germany, the UK as well, Western Europe and so on, fairly early on in the course of the epidemic in those countries. And many people who are falling into this category of total cases will end up adding to the figure of death. So calculating at the moment, trying to calculate the mortality rate for this virus is completely pointless. You can see here that the mortality rate varies country to country. Now, the country that has been through the epidemic and come out of the other side pretty much, although it's still presenting 67 new cases here, is China. And the figures for China are a mortality rate of around 4%. However, and they have a large number of total covered cases, so and a relatively small amount of active cases. So it's likely to be a more accurate figure. The problem is we can't really trust the figures coming out of China too much, because we know that they tried to cover things up in the early days. And we don't know how many of the population in China have actually been tested for the virus. How many people were actually infected? Chances are that this figure of 4% is an overestimate of the mortality rate. If we look at Italy, Italy is giving a mortality rate of 10% at the moment. But we know that the Italians have stated that their total cases, it does not reflect the total number of people in the population who've been infected. They haven't tested as many or as early as other countries, and they know that they're underestimating this figure. They also know that the health service there is being rather overwhelmed by the number of cases they're having to treat, and therefore the care that those patients are receiving is likely to be suboptimal and may lead to a higher mortality rate in Italy than in some other countries, even when all the figures come out in the wash when we finally get to the end of this dreadful pandemic. And you can see the figures vary colossally. So Spain has a high mortality rate using current figures. Similarly, Iran, whereas places like Germany have a very low mortality rate, 0.6% at the moment. Now, the German figure is actually more likely to be accurate. The Germans have stated that they started their testing very early. They developed a good test and started testing early, back in January, and have tested a lot of people. And therefore, the figure of 39,000 cases in Germany is far more likely to be close to an accurate reflection of the number of people infected in German society. The death rate for Germany is still, the number of deaths is still climbing, and they're still relatively early in the course of this. They're still seeing new cases of 2,000 a day, and ultimately this death rate here may increase while the total number of cases, or may increase faster than the total number of cases increases. So Germany's figure, whilst it's perhaps going to be a little bit closer to the final figure, is probably an underestimate of the mortality rate currently. And we go down and we see a huge variation from 7.5%, 5%, 1.5%, 5%, 1.4%, 5.5, 2.2, 0.69. That's in Austria, which may well have a similar situation to Germany in terms of figures. I don't know for sure. Huge variations here, but those variations, as I've described, are the result of likely to be the result of differences in the way the total cases have been measured and reported, and also reflect perhaps the different stresses on the health services in various countries. So people who go around sort of saying, oh, the death rate is really high, or the death rate is much lower than people actually think, or it's much higher than people actually think, are just being utterly wrong and somewhat irresponsible. We can only know the true mortality rate for a virus or any other infection once the initial wave of disease has pretty much passed through, and good estimates of the total infection rate and good figures for the total number of deaths can be calculated and can be used. So using current figures, the mortality rate, the average mortality rate, is coming out at 4.5% at the moment. But as I've said, that is almost certainly going to end up being a considerable overestimate. And it's likely that the mortality rate will end up being somewhere around 1% or below 1%. Personally, I think the Germans may be slightly underestimating at the moment, and I think most of these other figures are overestimates. But I might be wrong about that. What we need is the actual data towards the end of this, at least this wave of the pandemic. Now I'm going to stop now because I don't want this video to go on for more than 10 minutes. I would be interested to hear your views in the comments, and whether anybody would like me to make a video explaining about some of the different viruses that cause respiratory diseases, maybe something about how those viruses go about causing those diseases, and how severe the disease actually ends up being. I've seen some people claim that this particular virus, the C19 virus, is a flu virus. It isn't. They come from different families of viruses. I've seen other people say that the flu virus is just the common cold, and that's not true. The influenza virus is a different virus to the viruses that cause the common cold. So if anybody would like to see a video where I explain some of those differences, let me know, and I'll set about making one, since I'm sitting at home twiddling my thumbs a little bit at the moment. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all a bit later. Take care, look after yourselves, wash your hands, and do practice the social isolation. It does look as if it is working.